Well, it's Mailbag Friday here on the Morning Pit, and if you read Panther-Lair.com, you might have noticed that I didn't ask for new questions because we've got a few questions to wrap up from the last couple of weeks that I wanted to sort of clear out here before we get through. I guess this isn't our last Friday Mailbag edition of the Morning Pit of 2023, but it's our penultimate Mailbag edition of the Morning Pit in 2023. So I wanted to clear out as many questions as we could, get through those before we jump into a new one. So, because we had some great questions left over from the last 2 weeks. So we're going to answer those, talking about NIL, talking about recruiting, talking about transfers, and a whole lot of other stuff. We'll do it all right here on the Morning Pit on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. All right, it's a Friday edition of the Morning Pit, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com. There's the website, Panther-Lair.com. Pittsburgh.rivals.com, the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet. Football, basketball, recruiting, you find it all at Panther-Lair.com, and message boards to interact with hundreds and thousands of other Pitt fans all day, every day. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. And you know our YouTube channel here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. It's where we put all of our Pitt video content, these daily morning Pitt videos, Monday through Friday. We've got a weekly live stream that we do every Wednesday night at 8:30, except we've been doing them at 8 o'clock recently. And then this week we did it on Thursday night. So we did it last night at 8 o'clock. Me and Jim Hammett got together to talk a little Pitt sports with you. So we had to switch things up a little bit because of the Pitt basketball game on Wednesday. But we have that live stream. It's always a lot of fun. We're going to have some post-game basketball, some basketball post-game shows coming up. I think Pitt's got a lot of weekend road hoops games, and so we'll do a post-game show after those here in January, or I guess December, because the Syracuse game is on the road. I think we'll do a post-game show after that. And, anything else, press conference videos, post-game interviews. We've interviewed a bunch of the kids from the 2024 recruiting class. Hopefully you've checked those out. We got one that's going to publish today on Jasir Whittington, and I thought it was great. Not by any effort of my own, but because Jasir is really great. He's a smart guy. He's really well spoken, really interesting, and has done some interesting stuff. He had some interesting perspective on his team's state championship win over Peters Township, plus a trip that he took to Ghana last spring that I think was really interesting. You're gonna want to hear from him about that. And you might say, like, oh man, that sounds great. I hope I don't forget about it. How am I going to remember to see that video later today on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com? Well, I have a solution for you. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You just click the little subscribe button. It's right down there. And it doesn't cost you anything. It really doesn't commit you to anything. You just subscribe and our numbers go up and it looks good for us. And plus you can turn on notifications so you get an alert anytime we post a new video or we go live. You get it sent right to your phone. You'll never miss any of the things we do here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So help me out there, and also like this video, of course. Those things we always ask you to do. All right, let's get into some questions. And like I say, these are some questions left over from previous weeks. Let me see here. I want to start. There's a couple things here. There's two questions from 2 weeks ago that kind of tie in together. And I'm going to go with these to start off. DK16000 asks, how do college football players assess their market value before deciding to go into the portal? Do they first go to their existing school and request an offer to stay? And then Jade Lazinger asks, when a kid goes into the portal for NIL reasons, do they already have NIL offers, or are they looking to see what's available? All right, and these are, I think those are both good questions, relevant questions that I think are worth they sort of tie in together. And I think it's important or valuable to understand what the process is really like. Now, I can't sit here and tell you I know exactly what the process is like. Everything I know about the process of transfers and NIL and really recruiting is all secondhand. I was not recruited as a prominent high school prospect or transfer in the year of 2023. And so I don't know what that experience is actually like. But I've talked to a lot of people who are around the situation, and a lot of people who are who have experienced it and dealt with it in different ways, in different sort of parts of this ecosystem that exists right now with college sports and the transfer portal and NIL. And I think, there's probably a few different truths to establish here and understand. And I think most of them you probably understand or expect or already assume. But the number one, the first thing is that the transfer portal is set up to, ultimately, okay, let's ask this. What does the transfer portal do? What is the transfer portal? What does it do? The transfer portal offers an opportunity for players to make themselves available for contact from other schools. All right, if you go back, and I've often mentioned this, if you go back to the period before the transfer portal, if you wanted to transfer, you had to submit your paperwork requesting a transfer from your current school, and your current school could choose what schools to release you to. And they might say, okay, you can transfer, but you can't go to any school that we play in the next 5 years. You can't go to any conference opponent, and you can't go, if you're Pitt, you might say you can't go to West Virginia or Penn State. Why? I don't know. When they're not even on the schedule, you just want to be spiteful or something like that. That was what it used to be. You used to have, some control. Colleges used to have some control over where guys transferred to. And I think a lot of people, that was one big issue that a lot of people had. You remember Pitt fought hard to block the transfer of Cam Johnson going to North Carolina. And that was something that people had a big problem with, of trying to restrict movement. Like, why should you be able to tell a kid where he can transfer to? Why should you have that power? You don't own that guy's future. And so what the transfer portal ultimately did, at its most sort of empirical base function, is opening up, the entire world of college football as a potential contact. Because when college coaches go looking in the transfer portal and they sort by linebacker or wide receiver or whatever it is, they'll see a list of players, their eligibility, the school they're at, maybe height and weight. I'm not sure if that information's in there, but contact information. And they'll be able to look up contact information and find out how to get in touch with these other kids. That's what the transfer portal that's the opportunity the transfer portal affords, is an opportunity for contact. And so the rules as they're established are that you can't contact a guy or have contact with a guy until he's in the transfer portal, because otherwise it's tampering. But we all know that there is a certain way this world works, and it doesn't necessarily have to be that Deion Sanders called Sam Okunlola before he was in the transfer portal. I would wager a lot of money that Deion Sanders never spoke to Sam Okunlola before he went into the transfer portal. However, and you can look, Okunlola is an example we're just going to use here as a hypothetical. He ended up with a decent number of offers. Like A&M offered him, and I think Miami maybe, like a bunch of schools offered him scholarships coming out of the transfer portal. And I think it's not at all beyond the realm of possibility, and I think it's very much likely that Sam Okunlola or someone connected to him heard from people connected to schools. Like, let's say, let's make a complete hypothetical here of Texas A&M and Sam Okunlola. All right, and this really is a hypothetical. This isn't a wink, wink, haha, I know what happened here, and you can probably figure it out. But like, just a hypothetical, okay? Texas A&M has a collective, has boosters, has people around the program, but they're not connected to the program officially. They don't operate on behalf of the program in any kind of official capacity. They are an unaffiliated group or organization or individual, and they find out who they need to talk to around Sam Okunlola. They say, oh, there's this redshirt freshman defensive end at Pitt who had 5 sacks, looks pretty good off the edge, pretty explosive, seems like he's got a bright future. Who do we need to talk to? And so you find who you need to talk to. And some of these players have agents. Effectively agents. And so you find that agent, or you find a family member, and you say, all right, we're interested in this guy. And I shouldn't even use Sam Okunlola as an example, because it's unfair to him. I don't want to sit here and say this is exactly what happened with him. But you could take your pick of a lot of guys who went into the transfer portal from Pitt and guys who didn't go into the transfer portal from Pitt. And people who operate on behalf, in an unofficial capacity, on behalf of another school, reach out to the people around this player or that player and say, we'd like him to come play here, and here's what he can get from the in NIL. And that's the simple reality of it. And you can call it whatever you want. There are enough legal ways that they can get around the idea that it's pay for play or just straight up paying a guy to come to your school. But those numbers are real, and the numbers get thrown around, and the numbers become negotiating points. And then eventually, and maybe it doesn't take long to get to this point, but eventually the guy who, his agent or his family member, if, they've heard from this collective or that collective that here's the number X. Well, now that guy or his agent or his family member find themselves in a position of going back to their original school, probably not their coaches, but probably someone affiliated, again, in an unofficial capacity with collective or something like that, an organization or an individual who's unaffiliated with the university, and they go back and say, School A offered this number, X. So X is what it's going to take for me to stay here. And these conversations are happening all over the country. These conversations are being had between players and probably their coaches in some places. Pat Narduzzi said he never had any discussions about NIL. He said, quote, I let other people take care of that, which I thought was probably a more telling quote than he would have liked to. I don't know if he realized how telling that quote really was. Not about his involvement or lack of involvement, but just sort of openly admitting of what is happening in this world of college sports, which I think a lot of people assume and believe to be the case. But he more or less said the not so quiet part even louder. And so you end up with this conversation of like, well, this school is offering me X. Can you offer me X plus 1? Can you just offer me X? Maybe he really likes being at that school and he says, I'll stay for X, but if you can't get to X, I got to go to this other place. And a lot of these things, maybe 75% of that, I don't know, that's just a guess, but I think a lot of these things happen before the guy's ever even in the transfer portal. And that's the reality of it. And you could call it tampering if you want, but I think it's separated enough that you would never really be able to tie it back to anyone who's operating in an official capacity with the school, and probably not anyone, like no direct contact between a collective and the player. Third parties, backroom deals, put the potted plant in the third floor window between 8 and 8:15 so we can meet in the parking garage type of stuff. And probably not nearly that elaborate or interesting. But that's how it's happening. And so you talk about, did these guys go into the portal with an NIL deal already in place? I think in some instances, yeah. Because you see some guys that go into the portal and they're out of the portal a day later. That was set up. That was all put together. That's not just, wow, we just, love at first sight. I went into the portal and the first call I got, this coach, I just loved talking to him. I mean, it's put together. It's all set. And then that's the reality. And then some of these guys go into the portal and they collect a bunch of offers, and that could be scholarship offers or other offers, and they compare and contrast and decide what they want to do. But I said it on Wednesday's Morning Pit. I reiterated it on the live stream on Wednesday morning. I said it on yesterday's Morning Pit. I'll say it over and over and over again. I'm going to write it in the 3-2-1 column today. Everything you saw on signing day, every single thing, recruiting and transfers, if there was a surprise, if there was a flip, if there was a shock, if there was a recruit who was maybe going to flip and then didn't, all of those things. And I'm not just talking about Pitt. I'm talking across the country. They were all touched by NIL. Every single one. It's not hyperbole and it's not exaggeration. It's the truth. It's all part of it. It is all tied to that. And for a lot of guys, it's almost exclusively that. It's not about which coach can develop you the best. It's not about which school has the best history with your position, putting guys into the NFL. It's not about attendance. It's not about championships. It's not about on-field. It's not about anything else. Depth chart, playing time, develop, anything. Cash rules everything around me, right? Remember, kids, Method Man taught you that 30 years ago, and he's more right now than he's ever been. Always. Always. And then, DK16000 asked about NIL valuation. Like, how do college football players assess their market value? And here, this is a really sticky situation or tricky situation. And I forget if I answered this question before, but I think it's relevant to bring up again. And then we'll move on to a couple other questions here. This is one of the real challenges, is market value. because there's no transparency in this system. There's no database of NIL offers that guys are getting. The schools have records of these things, but they're not publishing them and they're not sharing them, and other schools aren't seeing it. And so you only have sort of word of mouth. Well, I heard this starting offensive lineman in the Pac-12 was getting this, so I think a starting offensive lineman in the Big 12 should get that. Well, I heard an SEC rotational defensive lineman's getting like $10,000 a month. Well, I think I should probably get $10,000 a month. It's all like word of mouth and telephone, and eventually, you have no idea how close you are to reality and how close you are to the truth. And then you find yourself in negotiations with players or their agents, and you're talking about like funny money. You're talking about made up numbers that may or may not have any basis in reality whatsoever. And you're just, okay, I can't prove that this defensive end you're referencing didn't get $250,000 or $450,000 or whatever it is. I can't prove that what you're telling me, like you're using that as evidence that, for why I need to come up with $450,000 to keep your player at my school. I can't prove that you're wrong. I can't prove that that guy didn't get that money, but I would bet dollars of donuts that he didn't. But I can't prove it because there is no market value. It's all like imaginary. It's all made up. And that's one of the real challenges, because then you can get these negotiations and you're not actually using anything real as a basis. All right, some of some questions from last week that we didn't get to. JSS Tartan asks, what changes have you noticed in this new NIL and commitment timing world from Pitt staff vis-a-vis recruiting, different tactics that they seek to maintain contact with recruits they just missed out on to another school just in case? I don't think, there's obviously always going to be changes. Year to year, you're always going to have different approaches with recruiting. Overall, I don't think it has changed a ton. You do keep in touch with recruits that you just missed out on, but I think that was always the case. You never know when you might get that opportunity late in the cycle to get a guy back. And even back in the day, you never knew when a year or two later that guy might want to transfer back home. You remember Christian Cullen ended up transferring back. Ray Vinipal ended up transferring. I can remember transfers that Dave Wanstead got or Paul Chris got, down the line, and they were guys that they had recruited and had connections with. There's nothing to be gained by burning bridges. And if you're Pat Narduzzi, sometimes you can burn a bridge and still end up getting the guy back. But there's nothing to be gained by burning bridges with recruits when they go to another school. I think Narduzzi was pretty fired up about Donovan McMillan and how he transferred. Or not how he transferred, but how he ended up going through his recruitment near the end of it. But he still, they still had enough of a relationship between the staff and him that they were able to get him back as a recruit. There's just nothing to be gained by burning those bridges, because you never know if late in the cycle you might have a chance to get a guy back. I think they were trying to get a couple receivers, and maybe a couple other positions late in the recruiting cycle that they weren't able to pull off, but they were still trying to work those relationships. So that hasn't changed. I think the biggest change in the recruiting cycle and the recruiting approach and the recruiting tactics for the Pitt staff in the last couple of years is just that they're doing that much more. The portal has added it's basically a whole other recruiting class of guys that you're trying to land. So you're not only trying to land the actual recruiting class, but you're also trying to add this second recruiting class that won't be as big, but you might have to work just as hard. And you're going to have a lot of guys, you're going to have them on official visits, and you're going to do in-home visits. I think it was probably a little easier for Pitt this year that they didn't really have any high school guys they were trying to close on. Maybe one, maybe two. They still have to go visit those guys, but they were able to focus a lot of their sort of persuasive recruiting approach on the transfers. Those were the guys that they were trying to land. So that's probably the biggest change that is occurred. Outside of, all that stuff I just talked about NIL, I think the biggest change is just the sheer volume of guys that you're trying to recruit in that same tight window of, basically the end of the regular season until the third week in December. Alan McMurray asks, barring getting an extremely talented running back in the portal, do you see Joel's Goff getting a good amount of time next season behind Rodney Hammond? Losing Yassine Willis is a bummer, but having Goff on board easily lessens that decommit. The first thing, it turns out that his name is actually Juelz. I thought it was Jules. For the past year, I've been calling him Jules Goff. But Pat Narduzzi said it, and I reconfirmed with a few other people that it's Juelz Goff. Is he going to get playing time this year? I mean, I think freshmen are always a possibility. I think when you look at the running back depth chart, and I think that, Alan, you asked that question probably before they got Desmond Reed, the running back from Western Carolina. I think if you look at the running back depth chart, you obviously have Rodney Hammond coming back. You've got Derek Davis, who I still think is worth exploring. They really didn't give him any playing time this season, nothing notable. But I still think it's worth seeing what he can do. And maybe he can do some more in Cade Bell's offense than he was able to do in Frank Signetti's. You brought in Desmond Reed as a transfer. You have Montravius Lloyd coming back as a redshirt freshman, Juelz Goff coming in as a true freshman, and then Daniel Carter sort of kicking around out there. I'm not sure what his role will end up being. Could Goff get into the rotation? I mean, I can't rule it out. I think running back is one of those positions where a freshman is always going to have the potential to see the field. Always going to have the potential to get out there and play. And so I can't entirely rule it out. I would guess that if Rodney Hammond stays healthy, it'll really be a battle for that number 2 running back spot. Maybe it's Reed, maybe it's Davis, maybe it's Lloyd, and maybe it's Goff. I'm not going to count Goff out of that competition, but there are a bunch of guys who are ahead of him. But again, running back is a spot where a freshman can play, and freshmen have played, and freshmen often do play and play well. Probably more than any other position in football. You get contributions from freshmen at running back, and so I think the door is open, and he's certainly talented enough. He's going to enroll in January, so he's going to be here early and have an opportunity to work through that. But otherwise we'll have to wait and see. And health will play a part of it, in it as well. Rodney Hammond and the rest of the guys ahead of him. If they stay healthy, then that's going to lessen the chances for Goff. Let's see. All right, last one here. Devil Dog 444 says, with early signing day on the 20th, how quickly after that class is signed do we see changes with the offensive assistant coach makeup? Would certainly seem like having that turnover in place quickly would give the new staff a full month of January to plug holes as they see them. Well, so it's right now it's Friday. It's 3 days after signing day or 2 days after signing day. I think my thought all along is that it would probably be around the time of the coaches convention in January. I think that's when it happens. It's usually like the first week in January, so I assume it's around that time again. My guess is that's when you'll see some changes happen. I think the offensive staff is where we're really going to be keeping an eye. We'll see if anybody on the defensive staff happens to get a job, somewhere else. Offensive staff might be where, Pat Narduzzi and Cade Bell decide to make some involuntary changes, involuntary for the assistant coaches. I still think there's going to be a few of those that happen. Taekwon Underwood looks like he's in place, but we'll see about Dave Borbley, Tim Salem, and Andre Powell. I think those are the 3 guys we'll really be keeping an eye on as you get closer to that. I don't know if there's much to be gained right now by making those changes. You could do it, or you could wait. You could wait until after Christmas. No, you don't necessarily have to fire a guy before Christmas if you're going to. So you can wait till after Christmas and then, make some decisions there and give those guys a chance to get to the coaches convention and see if they can find new work. So that's what I'm kind of looking forward to. As far as when it'll happen, we'll see. We'll see what actually comes to pass. But all right, that'll do it for us here. I do think I don't know. I haven't decided yet if we're going to release a Morning Pit on Christmas Day. I don't know. It depends on what all I can get done this weekend. I kind of don't want to, but the reality is, as you guys know, I tape these the day before. So whether I release one on Christmas Day or not, I still might have to work on. I don't know. We'll figure it out. I'll keep you posted for sure. But either way, thanks for tuning in through all of these. Thanks for keeping up with us through signing day and with the basketball games and everything going on in Pitt sports. I hope you've enjoyed all the recruit interviews that we've been doing. I think those guys have been Really great, really interesting. We've got more and more of those coming. We're going to try and get as many as we can out of this class before the January enrollees at least get on campus. We've already got 10 that we've published, and we've got more on the way. So I appreciate those guys for doing it, and appreciate you for watching the video. Make sure you like this video and subscribe. YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Enjoy your Friday. Have a great holiday weekend, and we will talk to you next week right here on the Morning Pit on YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com.